Hi guys, welcome back. So I'm going to do another movie review today. Just over a week ago I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Tarantino film. Now I was very excited to see this film, not just because it's a Tarantino film, but also because it was going to be the first one I'd be able to watch in the cinema. All the ones previously I've not been old enough to see. Even The Hateful Eight I think I just missed by like a couple of months. So this was a kind of experience just being able to see it in the cinema itself. Now Tarantino is a really special filmmaker for me. He was kind of one of the first filmmakers that kind of marked the transition from me watching films as kind of pieces of entertainment to kind of appreciating films as more than that, as kind of pieces of art. There's a very affectionate and kind of all-encompassing appeal to his film. His films are often about film and cinema itself, which I think is kind of most potently, I guess, represented in Inglourious Basterds. He uses film in that film as a way of ending World War II. So no matter whether you like his films or not, or whether you like some of his films more than others, I think you can't really deny that in each of his films, his passion for cinema just oozes off screen, and I think that in itself is a big appeal for me when watching his films. Now, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is kind of different from most films he's done before. It's still a Tarantino film in all the kind of most expected ways. It's still got the very kind of Tarantinian type dialogue. There's a kind of very distinctive way in which Tarantino dialogue flows. His obsession with everyday dialogue and kind of attaching it to not very everyday type people. And I think that's what's kick-started and propelled Tarantino to fame and success, and I think that's something he's been very consistent with. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood continues this trend. It's a very dialogue heavy film, and I think this is where perhaps the divide in the audience responses for the film kind of begins, because whilst Tarantino's films are historically very dialogue heavy, this is perhaps his most dialogue driven film, maybe aside from Jackie Brown. With this film, Tarantino isn't as interested in narrative and spectacle in the way his kind of latter filmography have been. So takes kind of Django Unchained and Inglourious Basterds. All these films kind of have a beginning, middle and end. This one is more akin to the kind of Jackie Brown Pulp Fiction style, in that because it's got a narrative, but it's not clearly divided. So while the film does have a climax, which I'll talk about a bit later, the first and second act blur into one long, almost hangout film. And it's interesting, I read a piece, I think in Time magazine, about Richard Linklater, and he's massively praised this film, which is unsurprising in many ways. The first and second act of this film in many ways function as a Linklater style film, very much akin to Days of Confused and that style of filmmaking. And we kind of just follow these people aimlessly around the Los Angeles setting. And incidentally, Days of Confused is one of Tarantino's favourite films, so this connection I think is definitely a valid one. And as I mentioned earlier, this will be the reason why people will love it, and also the reason why people won't like it as much. Thankfully for me, it's the reason I absolutely adored this film, and one of the reasons I rank it as one of his best films yet. I think Tarantino is best when his films are dialogue driven and dialogue heavy. For me, bottom tier Tarantino would probably be his Kill Bill films, mainly because in those films he was more preoccupied with narrative spectacle, specifically spectacle of huge kind of action set pieces. This film is very much a kind of Linklater style kind of hangout film. Linklater's another director I'm a huge fan of. So this is a style that I'm into anyway, and that was one of the things I loved about this film, was that we were just able as viewers to just kind of join this era, and we kind of just follow these people aimlessly around the Los Angeles setting. Specifically Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt, who's just absolutely fantastic in the film, as is Leonardo DiCaprio, but I'll talk about him kind of separately. Cliff Booth was my favourite character in the film, and Pitt, he kind of stole the show for me. Just kind of watching this guy just go about his weird, aimless duties. There's this wonderful scene with Brad Pitt's character, and we go back to his trailer park. Kind of reminded me of Mel Gibson's character in the Lethal Weapon films. We're just watching this guy just go about his kind of mundane duties in this kind of really comical way. It really just allows these characters to just breathe, and that's what I really loved about this film. Leonardo DiCaprio is really good as Rick Dalton, this kind of washed up actor, and obviously Cliff Booth kind of plays his stuntman turned kind of chauffeur. Rick Dalton's character works as one of the kind of centerpieces of what Tarantino is trying to do with this film. He's kind of telling two stories. Obviously, on the one hand, he's telling a story of the kind of Manson era killings, the end of the 1960s, the kind of bridge between the Hollywood golden age and the 70s period, which came with it many thematic changes in the way films were made and what films were kind of about. And then on the other hand, he's telling the story, which you can see in many of the interviews Tarantino's done about this film. He's kind of telling the story of the kind of disparity between fame and success in Hollywood. So living next to each other could be this kind of Rick Dalton character. You know, he's doing well, he's not doing bad by the kind of standards of you know, of the general public, of course. He's got a nice house in Beverly Hills, he's got a degree of fame, but then next to him is living kind of Roman Polanski, who's kind of accelerating to the peak of fame. Obviously this was set a year after Rosemary's Baby, and then obviously he would go on to do Chinatown a couple of years after this, and it makes for a very funny film, especially with the scenes with Rick Dalton where he's doing like these guest appearances on these TV shows and films, and he's kind of like forgetting his lines. It makes for some of Tarantino's funniest scenes. And the scene where he has that massive breakdown after messing up one of his lines works much better in context. It's like one of the scenes they use in the trailers. And this makes it one of Tarantino's most entertaining and funny films, whilst also being one of those films where the least things happen. The appeal for the film will firstly depend on how much of a Tarantino fan you are. If you don't like most of his filmography, style and his dialogue, you definitely won't like this film, because it won't have narrative and spectacle appeal that Kill Bill and Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained have. It doesn't have any of that, but instead it's a very funny, but at the same time very affectionate and passionate love letter to the 1960s golden age. And that really translates into the production design and his kind of vision for this era. The kind of 1960s period is so well realised in this film. It's dazzling to watch. You can really appreciate the film for its kind of visual and auditory qualities, from the kind of 1960s soundtrack to the fashion iconography. This is one of his best looking films for sure. That for me was one of the reasons that kind of swept me along from the beginning. Being in this world, this era that Tarantino has a lot of nostalgia for, and many people have a lot of nostalgia for, was really special in itself. And below this relaxed hangout film is this undercurrent of tension that is represented through Margot Robbie and her very sweet and I think beautiful portrayal of Sharon Tate. Now there's been kind of many criticisms of her and Tarantino apparently not giving her enough dialogue, but I think that's clearly missing the point. I think, you know, you've got to be very careful that you don't exploit this woman and her life and her tragic death. So it was a really sweet and kind of kind, affectionate portrayal of Sharon Tate, which I think was best played out in a scene where she goes to the cinema and watches her own film. I thought that was one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in the film. So I think Tarantino's been very careful and clever in the way he's kind of used Sharon Tate in this film, and the way her character interlocked into the story against the kind of Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth characters. Although a very kind of subtle performance and a very kind of underdeveloped performance, her character is the kind of building tension towards this tragedy that we know as viewers is about to come. And that's one of the other interesting aspects about the film, is that this is obviously a film and story where the audience know more than the characters themselves. Obviously we know about the Manson murders, we know that Tarantino's using this period of film and period of history, and we know where the film's climax is going to be. We don't know how it's going to end, and I'll get onto that in a minute. And because we know something that the characters don't, there's this constant feeling of tension that kind of contrasts with this very relaxed, aimless feel of the film. So whilst all these characters feel like they're just filling their time, actually they're hurtling towards this great tragedy that it's not only going to shake the industry, but the entire country itself. I think that was one of the most engaging aspects of the film, was that there was this constant feeling that something's about to happen. All of this fluffy, rose-tinted atmosphere where everything just kind of is just flowing very nicely. We know that it's all about to end. I think that's been a very understated aspect of the film. Many people are saying that this film actually lacks tension. Many people have criticised the misuse of Sharon Tate, but in fact, that whole aspect of the film provided the film with a huge amount of tension that I don't think would have had if the Sharon Tate character had not been in it, like some people have suggested. And this leads me on to the film's ending. Even like a couple of minutes before it happened, I was still very unsure on where Tarantino was going to take it. Now I know a lot of people have been kind of apprehensive about what Tarantino and where Tarantino was going to take this, and I understand that. I think, you know, with a subject matter like this, it's very difficult to kind of make it unexploitative. You know, these are real people, this is a real event, and they tragically died. So this is something that, as a director and writer, you have to be very careful in striking that balance between what can be seen as sensitive and what can be seen as very crude and insensitive. Thankfully, I think Tarantino absolutely nailed it. I think this is absolutely perfect. As I watched the film, there was a huge kind of divide in the cinema, and I've heard this from many other people as well, where, you know, that half of the cinema go with it and half of the cinema don't. Thankfully, I was part of that half that totally did. I think what he manages to do there is both incorporate a classic Tarantino style, but at the same time make it one of the most emotionally powerful moments of his career. And I think that is a balance that not many directors, and only directors like Tarantino and people of that caliber, could pull off. And I understand both sides to the argument, how, you know, it could be argued as exploitative and people could start analysing, unpicking it. But I thought it got the emotions, did the best with that historical event that it could have possibly have done. And I think that's what pushed the film over as one of his best films. I'd say top 3, top 4. I think it's probably his best film since Jackie Brown, which I still think is his best film. I just can't wait to hear how more people react to the ending and what they take from it, because it's definitely something that's going to divide people for sure. But yeah, I thought it was pitch perfect. I highly recommend seeing the film, especially go and see it in the cinema. You know, his films are meant to be seen on a kind of blown up format. It's definitely, for me, one of his most interesting films. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you later.